Hello and welcome to the CUFI UK podcast for Zion's sake. My name is Alastair and this is Alex.
Hello.
And we would like to welcome you as we discuss some of the latest issues relating to Israel. This week, we will be looking at the anniversary of the destruction of Jerusalem. Plus, the UK government has announced an important investigation into the atrocities that took place on the island of Alderney, site of the only Nazi concentration camp on British soil. Also, we will be discussing the importance of praying for Israel at this time, and also finding out how the Spitfire played an important role in Israel's victory in the War of Independence. So, Alex, let's begin with our first story. A 2,000-year-old coin has been discovered in Jerusalem. Not the first, of course, discovery which connects Israel with its roots as a Jewish nation formed, of course, thousands of years ago. But maybe you could explain why this particular discovery is so significant and why it's important to be talking about it at this time.
Yeah, so this week it was announced by the Israeli Antiquities Authority that there was a tiny silver half shekel that bears the Hebrew inscription, Holy Jerusalem. And it's dated to around 66 to 67 AD. And it's this tiny little coin that I find it quite funny that such a small little object can actually completely dispel the lies and distortions that anyone else...
Such big lies.
Yeah, such a big...
Yeah. By such a small item.
A small item.
Yeah.
And, so this has been dated over 2,000 years, around 2,000 years old. And it just shows that during the time that this coin was minted, it was Holy Jerusalem written in Hebrew with it's got thistles on it and some, other markings that indicate that it was a Jewish coin. And it's talking about Jerusalem as being a holy place. And it's interesting that they announced this discovery this week because it is the time when the Jewish people are commemorating the destruction of the temple and the ransacking of Jerusalem in 71 or 80.
And I mean, let's remember the fact that the context of the era that this coin was minted, it was under Roman oppression. It was during the time, of course, when the Jewish people were enacting a rebellion against the Roman regime, and yet what the Romans were trying to do was to strip the Jewish people of their identity and of their rights to Jerusalem as the Jewish people's holy city, as the holy city, and as the Jewish people's most the holiest site. And so actually, it just reaffirms to us today the connection that the Jewish people have, which is still trying to be eroded by those who are opposed to the nation of Israel.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where there's so many of these coins, so much evidence out there that shows the connection the Jewish people have had to Jerusalem for thousands of years. They're the only people that have put Jerusalem as their capital city in thousands of years. And I mean, with this, like you said, it was Roman occupation, actually. They were occupying Jerusalem and Israel. And this was about 30, 40 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus. So obviously we know what the scripture says about that, how Jesus wept over Jerusalem and things. And obviously Jesus was crucified by the Romans because it was during that time. But what happened was there was a Jewish rebellion against the Romans. They tried to fight off the occupiers, the Romans. And as a result, the Romans wanted to completely crush and destroy the Jews because they were rebelling against the Romans. And so what happened, it was the 9th of Av, and the month of Av, which is in the Jewish calendar, and it's known as Tisha B'Av, and that is when the Jewish people commemorate the destruction of Jerusalem. And what happened was the Romans literally destroyed the temple. They cast the stones from the temple off the Temple Mount, and there's still to this day giant stones, bigger than you or I, seated at the foot of sort of the wall outside the Temple Mount, and it shows the destruction of the temple. And me and you have spoken before about the Ark of Titus, which is a monument in Rome, and it was made in 81 AD, and it was constructed the Ark of Titus was constructed in honor of Titus, but he had actually died, and it was his brother, Emperor Domitian, I don't know how you would say that, and he actually made this ark for his brother in memory of the great victory that Titus had over the Jewish people. And in Rome, if you go there today, there's this ancient, arch, and
it's a centerpiece.
A centerpiece,
really, of in the Roman Forum.
Yeah, it's like it's a monument that thousands of people probably visit a day. And this arc is so influential that it actually influenced the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, the shape of it and things like that. That's how much influence it's had. But anyway, going back to the Roman arch, depicted on that is the victory over the Jewish revolt, and what as a motif, yeah. And what it's depicting is the spoils of war, the spoils that they got from Jerusalem, and there is a menorah, which the Jewish people are the only people that have menorahs as a religious symbol, and it was showing. I mean, the ark itself is depicting the victory over the Jews 2,000 years ago, and it just coincides with, the story of this coin being
during this particular, which we should emphasize is the week which has just gone. This is the week which commemorates that. Yeah. I just have a little story as well, just to add to that. Yeah. Because when the State of Israel was formed 75 years ago, the emblem, the sort of coat of arms, if we can call it that, the crest that the State of Israel adopted for its government has a menorah on it. And the artwork of that particular menorah was based on the artwork of that motif of the Ark of Titus.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So when you think about it, the Jewish people, the State of Israel, reclaimed back what was taken.
Yeah, exactly.
In the sense of, there it is in Rome today, as a monument to what took place, the atrocities against the Jewish people that took place under the Roman occupation, right there in the center of the Roman capital. And yet the Jewish people are back in their homeland. Yeah. They are thriving in the State of Israel, and Israel has reclaimed that which was taken from them.
Yeah. I know, it's amazing, because ultimately the Roman Emperor Titus, he tried to destroy the Jewish people. His brother made this archway as like a I wouldn't say a mockery, but he made it as like to signify the victory and the great thing that Titus had done to destroy the Jews. And actually, when Israel was reborn as a nation, like you said, they used that same symbology that's on that archway to depict their
own. And if you have a look at that emblem, it isn't just a menorah. It is the artwork. Menorah. Is that menorah matches that which is on the very top of the Ark of Titus?
Yeah, exactly.
It is a lesson to us all, of course, but particularly, I think, most importantly, is a lesson to the enemies of Israel. Yes. That those that glory in its trampling is. It will, there will be a humbling that will take place. Yeah, definitely. And where is the Roman Empire? Yeah, where are the Romans of that day? The Roman Empire is now buried in history. Yeah. But the Jewish people live on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I just thought it was a great thing, and it's great that for example, this coin that was discovered, which depict that time period and help to, paint the image of the Jews having Jerusalem as a holy land 2,000 years ago. It was found by someone who was walking on by the streams of En-Gedi in Israel, and they just picked up this tiny little coin, and it completely dispels all the lies and distortions from Palestinian leaders who are saying, oh, there's no Jewish temple, there's no history, Jerusalem's never been Jewish, all this thing. And it's like, well, this is a coin written in Hebrew that's legible today by Hebrew-speaking people, and it completely dispels the lies. And I just thought it was great that this tiny coin that they've got is just countering the lies. No, wonderful.
Well, I mean, we've been reminded, of course, of Israel's journey and of the fact that we are in the 75th anniversary year since the establishment of the State of Israel, a nation reborn. And we have a book to commemorate that. It's penned by Pastor John Hagee. It's a wonderful, I say small book. It's packed with lots of information about the story of Israel's independence, and done in such a concise way and a really colourful way that it's a fantastic book to read yourself or to pass on to other people. And we're making it available in response to any donation that is given to Christians United for Israel UK. And so I would encourage you, if you would like to receive this book about Israel's 75th anniversary and about its independence and its journey, really, to being reborn as a nation. If you would like to receive this book, then please do consider donating to Christians United for Israel. There's a special link that we are inviting you to go to. It is www.cufi.org.uk/Israel 75 book. Please visit that. Please feel as you are led to give whatever amount you feel led, and we would be very appreciative both of your donation, and we would be very glad to send you the book. Of course, all donations which are made to CUFI UK help us make a stronger stand for Israel here in the UK. So thank you very much for your support for CUFI UK, and we would be very glad to send you this book as an appreciation for your support. Shall we move on now to our next story then, Alex? A few years ago, we here at CUFI published an article about the atrocities on the island of Alderney. And Alderney is an island in the Channel Islands. And it was occupied by Germany, as the Channel Islands were, during World War II. And this was a story that sparked my interest, particularly when we were doing the torch, and this is the reason why we published it, was because there really was not a great deal of awareness about what took place on the island of Alderney. It was the site of the only Nazi concentration camp on British soil. When I first heard that there was a Nazi concentration camp on British soil, I was first of all intrigued because I hadn't heard about it. So I wrote this article for Torch magazine and researched the research which has been taking place. And we published this article a few years ago. And this week, I'm really pleased to say that the UK government has announced that it is going to be investigating these atrocities. The UK government has been aware of the fact that this was a Nazi concentration camp, but the number of deaths which occurred on there, which were perpetrated on there by the Nazis, was much lower than what historians believe it to be. So Lord Eric Pickles has ordered a review into what took place, and he's appointed 11 academics and historians and other experts in their fields, and they're going to be conducting an investigation, and they are also going to be linking with Yad Vashem, and together they are wanting to find out what the true figure is. So the number of deaths on this camp is the official number, according to the UK government, is 389. But for years, historians have believed it to be in the thousands, if not the tens of thousands.
Wow.
And we report on this in our in the issue of Torch magazine, which was actually November 2021. So this is a good thing. I believe.
To find the truth out about it, because it's strange really, because before you started speaking to me about Alderney and things, saying, did you know about the Nazi concentration camp on British soil? I was like, no, I didn't know about that. It was like one of those things, like we don't really speak about it. And I think now the island of Alderney, as you said, it's in the Channel Islands, and it's a place where people go for tourism and things. It's a lovely place. There's people living there. There's actually as far as I understand, there's some people who live locally who don't want this investigation because they don't really want to know that there has been atrocities on their doorstep. That their island may have been, or likely was, used for some experiments and some horrible war crimes of the Nazis and things like that.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, what happened was that when the Nazi Germany invaded the Channel Islands, Alderney evacuated.
Right.
So there are around 1,500 residents of the island. They all evacuated to England, and then went to various places across the British Isles, actually. So then almost immediately after, the Germans then invaded Alderney, and 3,000 of them initially went onto the island. So you imagine that. So the population doubled in terms of German troops immediately. They brought with them 6,000 prisoners of war from various parts of Europe, particularly from Eastern Europe and from from Soviet Union, and also from France. And many of the French prisoners of war were actually French Jews. Right. So there was a Jewish contingent within the prisoner of war camp, and there were four camps. Two of them were converted to concentration camps, and they were actually the SS were put in charge of those two concentration camps. Right. So there were a lot of atrocities. Historians have discovered a lot of things, but actually, one of the most significant reports was compiled by an intelligence officer called Captain Theodore Panchev for the British government immediately after Alderney was liberated. Right. And this was actually locked away in British archives, and was supposed to be locked away until 2045. Right. And immediately after this report was locked away, the British government at the time went completely silent on what took place. And it was buried away, and for one reason or another, the truth about what took place was hidden. But a copy of this report was actually given to Moscow as well, and that was because, of course, the Soviet Union had a interest in obviously what took place in terms of the victims as well. And it was only within recent years that historians have actually gained access to the documents in Moscow to actually then discover what took place. And a couple of years ago, some British Army officers, retired officers, including Colonel Richard Kemp, visited, and they did their own investigations, and they say, I want to make sure I get the number right, but they claim that the deaths was around 40,000 to 70,000 including many Jews.
Wow, 40,000.
Yeah,
That's
between 40 to 70,000.
yeah, that's a massive number.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully the investigation will find the truth, because like the minimum number they're saying is around 400, isn't it? So that's like the bare minimum.
That figure
is going to be
for most historians say it's in the thousands.
Yeah.
There are some who contradict and say no, it's not in the tens of thousands.
Yeah.
But either way, that initial number, which has been the accepted number, I'm pretty sure that is not the case. I mean, 6,000 were taken there initially.
Yeah, I'm just saying though that even if the minimum number is the one that we look at, 400 is 400 is an atrocity.
Yes.
If it's up to 40,000, that's just an astronomical amount of victims.
And I think the other thing is that the SS also, I mean, that is I believe the furthest west that the SS were operating, and the SS were nicknamed the Death's Head Unit. So this was taking place on there.
And what was their reason for taking Alderney then? Because am I right in thinking that there was something to do with chemical weapons?
Well, this is testing? The thing. This is, if we go and we cover this in our report, and that is Colonel Richard Kemp and his colleague who visited there. They did analysis, and plus there were other experts as well. There's been reports in terms of the witnesses which took place, in terms of what they saw, in terms of people on there with various masks and gas masks and horses with gas masks on, and there's archaeological research as well which has taken place. There's been, in recent years, there have been satellite sort of heat technology looking at the ground and looking what's underneath. And there is an opinion which is held, and this is, I believe, held by Colonel Richard Kemp, is that they believe that it could have been in preparation for a chemical weapon attack on against the southern coast of England.
Right.
There is the various military construction and terrain and logistics and tunnels. Think that of course we've probably heard of the V1, which is the prototype for today's cruise missiles. They believe that what was taking place on there, and the reason why the prisoners of war were taken there, was to help in terms of this. Oh, we'll say help is the wrong word, but you understand, to be forced to be used as part of this development.
Right.
And we must be very thankful, of course, that did not accumulate, because of course then the Allied made did the D-Day invasion, and that did not materialize. But just to put this into some perspective, Alderney is actually the closest Channel island to the coast of England. It's actually the closest also to the coast of France, because of the way the peninsula sticks out. It's close to France, but it's also closest to England. And it is just 60 miles away from the coast of England.
Yeah.
So 60 miles away from the coast of England, there was a concentration camp with thousands of people, with the SS in charge. And praise the Lord and thank you to those, that generation which prevented it from continuing and preventing it from materializing even further. But this is a much overdue investigation. It will determine the number of people, and I hope there is a small commemorative plaque on Alderney at one of the remaining pillars for one of the gates of the camps, and it's there today. But I'm hoping that there might be something come out of this in which the people that were victims are properly remembered and commemorated. And I believe that's the right and fitting thing. And as Lord Everett Pickle said, it matters because truth matters.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing about this as well is when we think of the Holocaust, we do think of it being far away from the UK. I mean, I know Europe's not very far away. We're in Europe. But it's sort of, there is this sort of like feeling that it's something that happened somewhere else. And I think this could be something which is then used to show actually it happened on British soil. This was closer to home. Hopefully it will act as a way of educating the current generation and future generations. And will, there's hopefully going to be an education and, self-reflection, that sort of thing. Because we need to ensure that we never, ever forget the horrors of the Holocaust. It was the worst genocide in history. And, if these numbers are correct and things, actually, they'll be adding numbers now to the victims of who died, because there's just not public information on this at the moment. And even Yad Vashem have said they're now going to help the investigation, aren't they? Because obviously they've got an interest in finding out the Jewish victims.
Yes.
But it is one of those things where we, there is a hope anyway, from my perspective, from many people who are seeing this, saying, hopefully this will be something which can be used to educate our youth, because there is a worry that the horrors of the Holocaust are going to be forgotten and are being diminished, and there's a lot of fake information out there. There's a lot of Holocaust denial on the internet. Social media and TikTok are full of it, and that's what our young people are looking at now. And hopefully if they can if this can be made into a big story when the investigation is done, hopefully it can help to educate people.
Absolutely And one of the reasons why the Nazis chose this island was because of the proximity to the English coast, but also because of the isolation. The fact that it was remote. There were some local eyewitnesses, and there were eyewitnesses from fishermen and so on and so forth. But what took place there took place in secret. And that's why all the residents were removed for their safety, of course, by instruction of the UK government. But then what took place on there is completely secret. So it's been very, very hard. But we do believe that what takes place in secret will be exposed. And so even though it's many, many years on, it is important that these evil actions will be exposed, because, as you rightly say, there are lessons which need to be learned. And it's always I think important to have a connection, to make a connection with the atrocities of the Holocaust. And I think young people, you mentioned young people, but for adults as well, is that if we don't have a connection, and many people do, of course, but if we don't, to actually make one. Because whether it be going to a Holocaust museum, or whether it be, be informed by the information which is available online, or if it is even going to visit a former concentration camp or a Holocaust memorial or something like that, to make that connection, because it's once we made that connection, we then feel it. And this is so close. What took place, 60 miles away, that's alarming, the fact that it happened so close, that actually, if it did happen, it did happen on British soil, we have a connection. Okay? We have, as people living here in the British Isles, we have a connection. But I just want to make that point, the fact that, we talk about the Holocaust Memorial in Westminster, the proposed memorial, which has been a real, let's face it, it's been a real struggle against a lot of opposition to try and get that Holocaust memorial built outside of Westminster. Thankfully, it seems to be moving in the right direction from what I last heard, but there have been various hearings and much opposition against it. But that, for me, is yet another reason why, as a nation, we should have a national Holocaust memorial in the center of our capital, because
a visible one,
a
big
visible
visible
one.
Yeah,
Because we have a connection, but also we need to make that connection,
yeah,
whether it be young people who are visiting our capital, or whether it be tourists or whoever,
yeah,
outside the heart of Westminster, outside Parliament, in the heart of Westminster, is, I think, really important. So I just wanted to add that point, the fact that it is important, and it's something that we at CUFI are calling for, fully supportive of, have had a petition for, and we're hoping will come to fruition.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's the thing, like, going back to a couple of points you made there, it's strange that there are these atrocities that happen and people still want to keep them in the dark for whatever reason, whether it's, I think the minor one actually is the one I mentioned before, where it's local residents who maybe don't want to know what happened. But actually there's still people who are saying, oh, this is a conspiracy, or they're saying, no, it wasn't that. You know, they're downplaying this rather than going, let's look at the facts, let's dig into this and find out. And I think it speaks volumes about, you know, some of the things we're dealing with when it comes to standing with Israel, standing for truth, you know, exposing the hatred and the lies and things. Like, some people don't want to have that. They don't want to shine the light of truth on these issues because it's something they don't want to deal with, or I don't know if it's a spiritual thing or what it is, but it's just really strange that there's such opposition to this kind of thing when actually we should be exposing it and we should be shining the light on it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
But going back to also another thing you said, which actually I think is quite convenient because it moves us on to the next thing we can talk about, is actually what Britain did in defeating the Nazis and standing against it. And that's one thing we should be proud of, I think, as our nation.
Yes.
Okay, we aren't perfect. We have made mistakes. During World War II, we even made mistakes.
Well, this is one of the... I think there are a number of reasons. It might have been, you know, buried away in the archives because of the fear that it might affect the morale of the nation, knowing that there was, you know, a Nazi concentration camp on British soil, on British sovereignty, or there was some controversy in the first place that Britain withdrew from the Channel Islands, and then, of course, Germany invaded. And so it might have been some political decision at the time as well. Although, that said, they made that decision, it was a strategic decision. Yeah, to protect which then British citizens, to protect British citizens, and, you know, all of those on Alderney were evacuated. But there might have been some of that.
Like a feeling of guilt.
Feeling of guilt as well. I don't know. I'm just saying there are a few voices which have expressed these things. Yeah. And thankfully, of course, that was a strategic decision which was then reversed by, of course, Britain's D-Day invasion and ultimate victory. But I'm just saying there was probably some political things, but you're absolutely right. There's, you know, sorry, just going back to your point.
No, I just think it's one of those things where we should be proud that we
should be proud of
stood against the Nazis. Yeah. We helped to liberate the camps. Yes, it was, you know, too late for too many people, and you know, we can look back on the past and hope that things were different, but ultimately the end result was we stood against evil.
Yes,
and there are, you know, thousands of men, well, mainly men and women, who gave their lives to fight the Nazis, to try and liberate the Jewish people from these horrors. And you know, I think we should be proud of that. And I think one of the heritages, like, this is now moving on to our next topic about the Spitfires.
Yes, we do have a Spitfire.
We have a Spitfire. Yes. And obviously this was part of one of the ways we won the war. We helped to, you know, defeat the Nazis was through British ingenuity.
Yes.
Through the Spitfires. And
absolutely. I mean, the Spitfire, synonymous with the Battle of Britain, and of course, such an important aircraft, which came to symbolise British defiance and British courage, and everything else, which became iconic in terms of the bravery of the Royal Air Force and what they achieved against Nazi Germany, against the Luftwaffe. And of course, we are very familiar with the history of the Spitfire. Of course, we have a bit of a connection here in Swindon, which was the place which manufactured the Supermarine Spitfire. And I think anyone in Britain or with a connection with Britain, connection of course with the Allies, will understand the importance of the Spitfire. And then of course the Spitfire was used by the Allied nations after the Battle of Britain as well, in the war effort, and to great success. But people might not realise that after the war, the Spitfire was then used by many other nations. And we have covered it in our latest Torch magazine. I mentioned about Torch earlier with the story of Alderney. Well, we do have a latest Torch magazine. Here it is. And one of the articles is actually how Spitfire helped Israel win the War of Independence. Yes, Israel.
There's an Israel connection to the Spitfire.
There's an Israel connection to the Spitfire. And we're not going to go through the whole story because we want people to read it in the Torch magazine. But let's give our viewers a little taste, shall we? So, I can go ahead. I mean, in terms of the Spitfire and why Israel started to use it, well, of course, when Israel was invaded by surrounding Arab nations, the day after it declared independence, Israel had just a few planes at its disposal. And bear in mind that they were up against established air forces such as the Egyptian Air Force. Now, the Egyptian Air Force had Spitfires. And Israel was being attacked by Spitfires. And there's a story, actually, of the Egyptian Air Force attacking what it thought was an Israeli Air Force in Israel,
an air base,
thinking that the British had vacated, because if you remember, Britain did that. They vacated after the end of the British Mandate, but actually the Brits were still there in the base. Shot down the it might have been more than one, but definitely shot down multiple of these Egyptian aircraft, including an Egyptian Spitfire. Well, anyway, moving forward, Israel, without the help of Britain, had to very quickly find some solutions. And Israel's first Spitfire was rebuilt from the debris of the Egyptian Spitfire that had been shot down by
the
British.
That's the thing. So it's British engineering mixed with Israeli ingenuity to stick it all back together, put it back in the air.
And they literally put it back together, and it was its first operating Spitfire. And in fact, one of its first planes within its fleet. And that's how Israel's journey with Spitfire began. But then, of course, Israel decided that it needed more planes. It needed more Spitfires. So, unfortunately, Britain and America would not facilitate this. And Israel went to Czechoslovakia, who had Spitfires, to ask if they could buy them. Well, they agreed, but there was Britain and America would not allow the transport of those Spitfires from Czechoslovakia to Israel. So they had to find a way, and they did find a way.
It's a very interesting story.
And it's an amazing story. It's a story which I think could be a film.
Definitely,
Okay, it should be a film. It was a story of bravery. It was a story of ingenuity. I'm not going to say everything. Stop me, Alex. But they managed to get Spitfires flown from Czechoslovakia to Israel. Now, if you know something about the Spitfire, you know something about the distance between Czechoslovakia and Israel, you will know that Spitfire could not manage that. But they managed it, and they managed it in a really courageous way. They did various things under the radar, and this literally was under the radar.
Under the radar, yeah.
So please, if that's giving you a taster, read this story, because then what happened as a result of Israel acquiring those Spitfires through an incredible way, and brave way, was then they used them in the fight against the Egyptian Air Force.
Yeah.
And Israel won.
Yeah, Israel won. Israel was a tiny nation, outmanned, outgunned, but it managed to win. And
yes,
yeah, I just want to say that was actually the start of the air superiority that Israel's actually enjoyed.
It was
throughout.
It was they went straight into the 101 Israel's 101 squadron, and it was the start of the Israeli Air Force.
Yeah, and it was birthed through their acquirement of Spitfires.
And I just wanted to read this last paragraph because you might say, well, the Spitfire was used by other nations, used by Egypt. Actually, according to Israel's records, 24 enemy aircraft were shot down from the air during the War of Independence, and Israel rapidly established air superiority. I mean, when we consider about the amount of strength that Israel's enemies had, it is miraculous.
Miraculous, definitely.
That they went from recovering broken Spitfire parts to form its first planes, to then having a fleet of aircraft within very short. And this only happened over, 8 months or so in terms of, this happened very, very quickly. And the last paragraph says, although Spitfires were used by Israel's enemies, Britain's battle in the air in World War II reminds us that the Spitfire was originally built to defend freedom and fight against evil. They were not designed to be used by our enemies. They were built for good. In 1948, Israel reclaimed the Spitfire from the debris of its enemies and united British engineering with Israeli ingenuity. Evil was defeated. Good triumphed. So if you would like to read more about that story, please do subscribe to the Torch magazine. You can get this issue at www.cufi.org.uk/torch. You can access this by reading it online, or you can receive it in the post if you live in the United Kingdom. I would also say that if you would like any back issues, including the back issue of the issue that we referred to earlier about the Nazi concentration camp on British soil, that is in issue number 19 of November 2021. We would be very happy to send you one of those as well, but we would just ask you to do something slightly different, and that is to email us. You can email us at info@cufi.org.uk. Yes, that's it. info@cufi.org.uk. And just mention that you've watched the podcast and you would like some back issues of Torch, and we would be very happy to send them to you. And maybe when you've finished reading it, pass it on to someone else. But make sure that you are subscribed so that you can continue to receive future issues. And it's important to point out also that Torch is free. It's free of charge. We produce these resources because we want to get stories like the ones we've discussed today, and most importantly, the messages behind standing with Israel. These are messages which we are not hearing within other platforms such as on the news. They're important messages, and we believe that we are called for such a time as this to make a strong stand for Israel in this nation. So we are producing these resources absolutely free of charge. We don't want to put any barrier in order to for you to gain hold of them, and also for us to reach the people that we know need to read these messages. But because of that, it does obviously still come at a cost for CUFI to produce them. So once again, if you would like to support this project or any other project towards the work of Christians United for Israel UK, then you are able to make a donation at the address at the bottom of the screen, www.cufi.org.uk/donate. And once again, your support is really appreciated.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, well, we're going to move on now to the final part of the podcast, which is more a spiritual look at things. But I just want to like have a bridge between the two stories, because one thing as Christians, when we're praying for Israel and we're dealing with Israel, we're not able to go on the front lines, take up arms and defend Israel physically, but we can do it spiritually. And there's something about the Spitfire. You don't mention this in your article, but when it came to the Spitfires, it was actually a group effort from British people. Okay, it was British engineering. It was the people that actually, put the planes together. It was the pilots that flew them and so forth. But actually, there was a way in which the British housewives at the time were able to contribute to Spitfire. And that's because they had a shortage of tin and copper and things like that. They had a shortage of metals in order to build these Spitfires. So the government put out a big campaign saying, give us your scrap metal, give us your pots and pans, and we will turn them into Spitfires and fight the Germans. And so what happened was millions of people around the country donated to the cause of the Spitfires. There was ladies getting old pots and pans, donating it to the scrap metal collectors, who then melted it down and turned it into Spitfires. And I just thought it was quite an amazing thought, really, that these pots and pans from these, many of them would have been Christian housewives in the UK, were then flying over Israel and defending the Jewish people. It's just like an amazing thought, really, when you think of this sort of thing. And I just thought that goes to the... it's like there was an act there which, it was a simple action on behalf of these families in the UK that ended up helping Israel win the War of Independence. It actually helped, the fulfillment of Bible prophecy happen. And I just thought it was an amazing thing. Well, one thing we can do as Christians is pray for Israel. I wrote an article this week about it, and especially at this time, obviously one thing we've not spoken about at the moment is judicial reforms, protests in Israel, and things like that. And we're not going to go into that now. Me and you are probably not equipped enough to know the ins and outs, but also as CUFI, we are non-political when it comes to Israel's politics. It's up to Israel to decide what it needs to do. But one thing we need to do is pray for Israel. We need to pray for the Jewish people, pray for the leaders of Israel, that they will make, good decisions, that there will be unity in Israel, because Israel cannot afford to be divided or have any issues with themselves when there's so many things trying to destroy Israel. And so that's why we need to pray, because ultimately, there's terror groups around on every border of Israel. There are constant terror attacks. There's a constant need for Israel to have its military around. It's got attacks from the United Nations, from governments, from media outlets who are distorting the truth, and spreading lies and stirring up people's hearts to hate Israel and the Jewish people. They've also got, Prime Minister Netanyahu has had a pacemaker fitted this week. Obviously he's got some health issues. There's a lot of stress within the internal politics of Israel right now. There's a lot of things going on. Israel is under pressure now, unlike we've seen actually for a long time, I would say. And not all of it is, like even with the internal politics and things like that, there's still forces at work internally that are trying to see Israel's downfall, unfortunately. And so we really do need to stand as watchmen over Israel, stand as Christians and pray for Israel and the Jewish people, pray for the peace of Jerusalem, pray for unity. And the scripture I wanted to bring forward is just a very simple one, which we all know, Ephesians 6 verse 12, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. And, I just wanted to sort of end on that, really. It's like, we as Christians, we have a duty to pray for Israel. God commands it in the Bible. It's clear as day that we're meant to be praying. But also, even though Israel can have lots of allies around the world when it comes to governments and things like that, there's only one spiritual ally that Israel can have, and that's Christians. There's no one else who can be praying to God, and you know what I'm saying, and having divine, intercession on behalf of the Jewish people. We are the only ones. So if Christians aren't praying, we're not doing our job, and we're the only ones who can do that job.
Yeah.
And so I just felt that thing. It's like, actually, it's not only that we have to pray, but we're the only ones who can pray. Like, do you know what I'm saying? I don't know if I'm making sense even by saying
in terms of allies,
in terms of allies,
yeah.
And so, like Christians are the only ally spiritually that the Jewish people have. And so, I just had that on my heart. I wanted to share that. That's a wonderful analogy. And I think, going back to your pots and pans, everyone in that story contributed. The ones that were called upon, they brought what seemed to perhaps seem quite trivial at the time, and it was used for much higher purpose. And when we are, looking at Israel, considering how we can best support Israel, we've already mentioned about the financial support, and that is one way. We've mentioned about prayer, and that is so important. And of course, we've spoken many times about our campaigning. These are a number of ways that might seem quite trivial, but actually we're bringing them, when we bring them to service to God, and we bring them, Lord, this is what I have. This is what I have. Lord, use me, use what I have. I might not have much money. I might not think I can be effective writing to my MP. And Lord, I'm just sitting here at home and just praying. Well, there's no such thing as just praying. Okay? Because God hears. And so I agree with you. We need to be listening to what God wants us to do, and to be stirred, to be obedient, to bring before him the things that we have at our disposal, believing that God will use it for a higher purpose. And that's what we believe in here at CUFI, is that, here we are observing, we're looking at a situation in Israel that we have no effect on physically. We and perhaps we don't really know what to do about it. And likewise, in any area of our work, we look at the challenges that Israel is facing. We look at these great and grave threats towards Israel's existence, and we think, well, how can I do anything of significance? Well, we can. And it begins with being obedient and listening to what he wants us to do. And coming before the throne room of God and praying for the peace of Jerusalem, praying that God will protect and preserve Israel, that God will bless Israel, that God will give Israel courage and give Israel wisdom. And, these are scriptural things that actually we will be able to be used. And those prince and power of the air and all these spiritual things that are actually where the warfare is, we will believe that we will be effective in countering those. So, I agree with you. Let's bring our pots and pans to the table, and let's believe that we will be effective for Israel's cause. And I guarantee you as well, those ladies who donated the pots and pans, many of them would have been Christians, and the power of prayer at that time during World War II as well was a winning factor in the war.
Absolutely.
There were national days of prayer called by the government to pray. That's an amazing thing. And so so as Christians, we're not going to have a national day of prayer for Israel, but as Christians,
we can.
We can as a smaller group, but I'm just saying, like, our government's not going to call for that, obviously. But
let me ask you then, because someone listening might ask this question: how can we pray for Israel today? How can we pray with what Israel is being faced with in terms of its internal and political turmoil? How do you think best we can pray?
I think one good way is, I think, opening up the Psalms and praying like David prayed over Israel. Like, I mean, we sometimes see these things as modern day new things that have happened, which, you know, as the saying goes, there's nothing new under the sun. The same hatred that, you know, was against Israel 2,000 years ago when the Romans tried to destroy the things of God. You know, it's the same hatred that's there today. You know? And to be honest with you, that tragedy that took place 2,000 years ago in the temple was destroyed, that's never been rectified from, you know, it's still a tragedy today. The Jewish people still have no temple. They still can't pray in the holiest place that God gave. You know, there's, you know, it's throughout history. You know, the same conflicts internally that have that are taking place. Okay, maybe slightly different, but there was still conflicts internally back in those days and things. And so I would say, yeah, read the Bible. That's the main thing. Read the Psalms especially. Where they are prayers and songs. Many of them are over Jerusalem, and I think that would be my thing.
That's
like,
good.
Use the
really
Bible.
Good perspective.
So,
use the Bible.
Yeah.
Amen. Well, God's word is truth.
Yep.
God's promises are faithful and enduring. So that's a good point to end on, I think, Alex. And finally, we just want to thank you for listening, or thank you for watching. And thank you for supporting us. And of course, we do really encourage you to share this video, to like it, to hit the subscribe button, to forward it on to friends. And we hope you've enjoyed it. We hope you've taken something from it. And of course, we've just been blessed also that you have joined us for today's podcast. So from Alex and I, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.